Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, where we unleash the truth of Genesis.
And today we ask the question, why is evolution, which is a story, a supposed story about our history, taught as operational science in classrooms?
Welcome to Genesis Unleashed. We're on question 14 of the 15 questions for evolution flyer, question 14. And question 14 reads like this. Science involves experimenting to figure out how things work, how they operate. Why is evolution, a theory about history, taught as if it is the same as this operational science? And the detail in the question is, you cannot do experiments or even observe what happened in the past. Asked if evolution has been observed, Richard Dawkins says, evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed while it's happening.
Right.
I love that quote.
I love that
That's
quote
great.
too.
For details on this, if you want to go more in detail about the seriousness of this question for evolutionists, go to creation.com/notscience, because it's not science. Creation.com/notscience.
Right. Yeah, this is one of my favorite quotes, and I don't want anybody to think that we're misquoting Dr. Dawkins, anything he said. So you can actually look up the transcript there and go and see. This is basically taken from when Richard Dawkins was being interviewed by Bill Moyers on the show Now. And so the transcript, you can go there and you can read the entire thing. And from the transcript, Moyers asks Dawkins, he says, is evolution a theory, not a fact? And Richard says, evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed while it's happening. Now, if you keep reading, because that sounds pretty silly, to be honest. It's been observed, but not when it's happening, which means it hasn't been observed, right?
We sort of snicker at it.
Right, but and some people say, well, you know, maybe you're just misquoting him. Obviously, Dawkins believes in evolution, so did he really say that? He really said that. So Moyers, picking up on the inconsistency, says, well, what do you mean it's been observed then? Because he's just admitted it hasn't been observed. And Dawkins says, well, the consequences of, it's rather like a detective coming on a murder after the scene, and the detective hasn't actually seen the murder take place, of course. But what you do see is a massive clue. Now, any detective, so then Moyers pipes in and says, circumstantial evidence? And Dawkins says, circumstantial evidence, but masses of circumstantial evidence. Huge quantities of circumstantial evidence. It might as well be spelled out in words of English. Evolution is true. I mean, it's as circumstantial as that, but it's as true as that. And you can go and check out that transcript, and you can see that that's in Richard Dawkins' own words.
Yeah. So Dawkins has admitted that evolution hasn't been observed.
Right.
I mean, that's obviously we're saying the same thing, and we say the same thing about creation. I mean, nobody alive today was there to observe the events of creation over 6 days as recorded in Scripture. I wasn't there, you weren't there.
Right.
No scientist alive was there today.
Now, the thing is, we're accused of not being, we're pseudoscience, or we're not real science. You creationists, that's not real science because no one, well, no one has seen it? Well, then, I guess the shoe's on the other foot now, because Dawkins has admitted nobody's seen evolution either.
It's the same shoe on the same foot. We're all in the same boat here. And this is what we try to communicate through the many articles on creation.com and so on. Creation and evolution are very similar. They're both stories about the past. They're both, really, if we're honest, they're both outside the realm of science. They have to do with science, with making observations about the world, but they're not scientific. Neither one is scientific.
Right, in the terms of it's not repeatable, it's not like an experiment you can set up, observable science, that type of thing. When you think about science, and I mean, people do this all the time when I'm doing seminars and stuff, they'll come up to you and say, well, yeah, but Cal, science has proven this, or science has proven that. And of course, they're usually talking about a type of science done according to the scientific method.
Yeah,
right?
Empirical science, and I mean, most people watching this can probably come up with a definition for science. Science is a total collection of knowledge gained through our senses and whatever that might be. One of the definitions is it's based on or concerned with or verifiable by observation or experience rather than theory or pure logic.
Right, so that's empirical science.
Empirical science, yes.
Oxford Dictionary's definition of empirical. So it's concerned or verifiable by observation or experience. So you've had to have had the experience. You saw it, you felt it, you touched it, you smelled it, or you've done some kind of observational experiment.
Right.
Well, if that's empirical science, I mean, Richard Dawkins is a former holder of the Chair of Public Understanding of Knowledge at Oxford University. So I would well imagine he knows what empirical science is based on. It's based on observation.
Sure.
He's just admitted that evolution has not been observed. So you certainly cannot then say that evolution is a fact because you haven't sensed it. You haven't felt it. You haven't experienced evolution.
Yeah, science is limited in that way. It's limited to what can be observed and experimented on and so on. In the present, it's limited in that sense.
Right. So neither creation or evolution can be considered empirical science. Now, really, when you look at this, and I like to use a court case analogy when I'm explaining this out doing seminars to really get people to understand the difference between operational and historical science. Because science does relate to what we're trying to figure out in the past.
Yeah,
right?
creation evolution is like two lawyers arguing a case.
That's right.
Courtroom.
You go to, you're observing a trial. There's someone been accused of something. You've got your prosecutor. They're observing a certain set of data, the same set of data that the defense lawyer's observing, but they're observing it and explaining it through a certain paradigm because they're actually paid to do it. They're that biased, right?
They're paid to think with a certain bias.
Before they even take the case, the prosecutor knows how he's going to argue. This person is guilty, and these set of facts will prove it. And, the defense lawyer is paid by their client to view the same data through a different paradigm before they take the case. This person's innocent, and these facts are what I'm going to use to prove that. So they're completely biased. So let's just face it. We're biased. Richard Dawkins and every atheist is biased. And then there's a whole bunch of people in between going, well, yeah, but how do you figure this out? Well, let's just admit our bias, admit our starting presuppositions here, and understand that it's the same facts that we're all looking at.
Isn't that part of the issue, though? I mean, the reason evolutionists often get so emotional sending in comments to our website and so on is because they don't understand this foundational aspect of the origins issue, and that is everyone approaches things in the past with a particular bias.
That's right.
And we can...
Even many Christians have come to believe that, well, evolution is science. No, evolution is a belief about what happened in the past based on certain facts. Now, Dawkins is always talking about this mound of evidence that supports evolution. The fact is there's a mound of evidence. And there's new facts coming online every day.
There's a mound of facts, and it's been interpreted to be evidence for evolution.
Exactly. Because
it can also be interpreted to be evidence for something else.
That's right. So there's just this mountain of facts. Now, people say things like, well, the facts speak for themselves. Well, if that's true, you wouldn't have a lawyer.
Right.
Because facts always get spoken for.
Yeah, in that arena.
And then interpreted to support whatever belief you already hold to, just like the courtroom case.
And that, again, sets it apart from science, because in science, facts do speak for themselves. It doesn't matter what your bias is or whatever.
Yep.
If it's observed, anyone, or if you do an experiment or whatever, and you do that in the present, obviously, and you observe the results.
Yeah. What temperature does water have to be at sea level to boil?
Or
100 degrees Celsius. Nobody's arguing about that.
Yes. And that, or you mix several chemicals together in a lab, and you get a certain energy output, a certain heat output. And anyone can do that experiment, and regardless of the biases that you have going into the experiment, you're going to get the same results.
That's right.
It doesn't matter.
That's right. Now, Dawkins actually... He actually backed up my court case analogy there one time.
Same analogy, didn't he?
He did. Yeah. He actually said this in a quote. He said on a show called The Genius of Charles Darwin. He said, "No one has actually seen evolution take place over a long period." By the way, what you just said for a second time now. Nobody's seen it, right?
Right.
Then he says, but you have seen the after effects, and the after effects are massively supported. Here's his story again. He says it's like a case in a court of law where nobody can actually stand up and say, I saw the murder happen. So now he's said it for the third time publicly, right? And yet you've got millions and millions of pieces of evidence which no reasonable person can possibly dispute. So here we go again. It hasn't been observed. It hasn't been observed. It hasn't been observed. All the facts point to evolution. But he's using a court case analogy. So here's what I like to point out to people here in our home country here in Canada. Officially, in Canada, I mean, I like to set it up this way. What would you call a courtroom system where only one side got to talk about the facts? I mean, if you went to a courtroom and the prosecutor got to talk about the evidence, but every time the defense lawyer went to they muzzled them. Well, what kind of court system would that be? It'd be a farce, right?
Yes,
It's just a joke. Now, officially, in Canada, I don't know where you're watching from, but in Canada anyway, the official curriculum in our public school system, guess how many different ways they teach the question of origins to the young people? One way.
And of course, that's obviously not just Canada, it's everywhere.
That's called indoctrination, folks. Because the other side never gets a chance to speak. Why? Well, that's religion. Well, wait a second.
Right.
Atheism is religion, and evolution supports atheism. So you're only allowing, nobody in a classroom in Canada, in a public school system, whether they're a Muslim, whether they're a Christian, whether they're Hindu, whether anything, they don't get represented as far as the concept that there is a creator God.
Yeah.
Officially, everything's natural. It just happened materialistically, which is actually support of the atheistic religion.
Yeah, and there's many would probably be familiar with court cases in various states in the U.S. where there was an attempt to say, well, why don't we just try to bring in evidence that goes against evolution, and not even evidence. They weren't saying, well, this is creation evidence, or this is going to support the Bible, or this is about God.
Just intelligent design, evidence that the things, the structures we see in living things,
the weaknesses, the holes in evolution theory. Can we teach that?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. Can't do that either.
Right.
So,
which is another indication that it's not real science. Because science, we work with a lot of scientists.
Right.
If you know anything about science, it's like you come up with your theory, you write out your thesis, you publish it, and then it's basically like a skeet shoot, right? And everybody gets a chance to take their shot at it. And if there's anything less, well, you might have a good scientific idea.
That's right. Yeah. And so we got some responses to this as well.
Yep.
One of the answers.
Really, we only had one answer to this.
Only
to be
one.
honest,
Okay.
This was the answer. There have been plenty of experiments that demonstrate evolution. One of the most famous being Lenski's experiment.
If that was true, why doesn't Dawkins cite them? Seriously. But it just illustrates again that
they're misunderstanding.
You can do an experiment. No doubt, experiments are done on mutations, on genetic change, and so on. You have bacteria and go through many different generations. The fruit fly experiments years ago.
Observe natural selection.
We observe that, and those kinds of experiments are done, but those things fit very well with the creation model as well.
Yeah.
They can be interpreted to fit different models of origins.
What experiment can you set up in a lab showing me ape-like creatures turning into people over millions of years? You can't do it.
You can't, because it involves millions of years.
Yeah.
You've got something that happens over a longer span of time than an observer can observe.
If you believe ape-like creatures have turned into people over millions of years, you believe it on faith. You've been shown some diagrams or some skulls. Well, we believe this one turned into that one, and we think this one turned, but you haven't observed it. It's not empirical science.
Right.
Right? It's a interpretation. So, creationist biologists have no arguments with these. Okay, we can observe mutations, we can observe natural selection. We're not arguing that.
Absolutely.
They absolutely fit into the creationist model. There isn't an observation that creationists and evolutionists make, you've said this many times, that we don't agree with. We're all observing the same thing.
Because it's not a battle about the observations. We agree with all the same science.
That's
There's
right.
no disagreement there whatsoever.
Encourage people to look up the article, It's Not Science. So just creation.com/notscience. And you'll get a great explanation of this, because I find many Christians, I find many evolutionists have really not settled this. And once you get to there, then you can move the arguments forward further, I believe, in an intelligent manner.
Yeah. As for going back to Lenski's experiment, that's old news. It's been thoroughly refuted. For example, in Dr. Jonathan Sarfati's book, one of CMI's scientists, in this book here, Greatest Hoax on Earth, in Chapter 4. He deals with that definitively.
That's
in
right.
that book.
As a matter of fact, Dr. Don Batten, one of our scientists over in Australia, also wrote an article specifically on that. He dealt with that so-called evidence right away, because many evolutionists were saying, "Oh, this is proof we've observed evolution." And his article was called "Bacteria Evolving in the Lab: A Poke in the Eye for Anti-Evolutionists." That was actually a talking about Jerry Coyne in the United States is an anti-creationist, an atheist, and he was saying, oh, this is a poke in the eye for evolutionists. But you can read Don's article, which thoroughly refutes this claim that evolution has been observed. And you can just go creation.com/citrate. It's one of the things that this bacteria was supposed to have developed a new way of absorbing. So anyway, creation.com/citrate, and you can read through that and just show, we're going to say it again, variation in an existing trait or a bacteria or something like that doesn't tell you how the bacteria or traits in general have come to be. We know there's variation within the kinds, so that's not evolution. So you can go to creation.com, you can check out more information, you can look up all the 15 questions, and tune in again when we handle the final question in the series coming up.
All right. Has been observed. Richard Dawkins says, evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed while it's happening.
Right.
I love that quote.
I love that quote too.
For details on this, if you want to go more in detail about the seriousness of this question for evolutionists, go to creation.com/notscience, because it's not science. Creation.com/. Welcome to Genesis Unleashed, where we unleash the truth of Genesis.
And today we ask the question, why is evolution, which is a story, a supposed story about our history, taught as operational science in classrooms?
Welcome to Genesis Unleashed. We're on question 14 of the 15 questions for evolution flyer, questions not science.
Right. Yeah, this is one of my favorite quotes, and I don't want anybody to think that we're misquoting Dr. Dawkins, anything he said. So you can actually look up the transcript there and go and see. This is basically taken from when Richard Dawkins was being interviewed by Bill Moyers on the show Now. And so the transcript, you can go there and you can read the entire thing. And
14. And question 14 reads like this. Science involves experimenting to figure out how things work, how they operate. Why is evolution, a theory about history, taught as if it is the same as this operational science? And the detail in the question is, you cannot do experiments or even observe what happened in the past. Asked if evolution had